Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. Again, thank you for being with us this week. Today, we're going to talk about two-channel audio, Denon and Marantz. Again, this is a global session, global co-hosted. We have Australia, New Zealand, we have Southeast Asia, South Asia, India, Middle East, the Gulf states. There might be some people from Europe, Russia. I've seen definitely someone from South Africa. Hello there. And the Americas. So very exciting. I am Frederic. I'm the product marketer for rest of Asia at Sound United, based in Hong Kong. Also joining us today is Jim Crowley in Minnesota, representing the Americas. And behind the scene today, we have also William Chang, our veteran product expert for Denon and Marantz in Hong Kong. We have Jen and Phil in San Diego, California. So they will be answering your questions online and live. Hi, Phil. Hi, Jen.
What's up? How you guys
Hi.
doing?
We have well over 250 registered participants. So again, a big thank you to all the partners across the region for promoting these webinars and giving us an awesome audience. So hey, Jim, do you want to take the lead and start with the brand histories?
Sure, I will do that. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Frederic. Thanks for the lovely introduction.
You're
Phil
welcome.
and Jen, hello out there.
Good morning, all.
How are you doing?
Wow, the dulcet tones of Phil Jones and the melodic voice of Jen Mash. Look at that. So, Frederic and I work for Sound United. Sound United is not a public-facing brand. It is the brand under which Denon Marantz, Class A, Definitive Technology, Boston Acoustics, and Polk Audio all live. That is who we work for, but we don't want people to talk about Sound United. And I think some of you are probably familiar with another company that's set up that way, and you maybe know two of them. You might know the Volkswagen Group brand. I knew that Volkswagen and Audi were together, and I thought maybe Porsche had some kind of association, but Bugatti, Ducati, I had no clue. So the Volkswagen Group, even though they have all of these individual brands, work under this single umbrella to share and leverage economies of scale and yet maintain individual brand identities. And that's what we do. We do maintain the individual brand identities, and we'll get into a little bit deeper detail. This gives you an idea of the different brands and where we live kind of in the audio pyramid, especially if you consider price. As you can see, Polk is kind of in the incredible sound, affordable price category. Definitive is in a little bit more expensive category. Denon is sort of straddling incredible sound, affordable price, and upper end mid-fi, which is where Marantz lives, or premium hi-fi. And then you've got the high end where Class A lives, which is the tip of the iceberg and frankly, an entity all on its own up there. So hopefully that gives you an idea who Sound United is. We don't expect you to ever use that with customers. As far as having the brand identities, Denon has its history and identity. It's a 110-year anniversary this year. And we were the first, have been known for a long time as being the first name in digital audio. We talk about the heritage of the sound and also the technology. For Denon, technological firsts have been and remain very important. And at the same time, Denon sound is clean and dynamic. I like the term punchy. That's what I like. And it's a very different sound than Marantz. Marantz, which is approaching its 70th anniversary, is a different company. We're known for our warm and musical sound quality. However, both of these brands have people that are in charge of making sure that those two brands maintain that identity that they've kept for all of these years. And we'll get into deeper detail as we move forward.
Okay, so let's go ahead with Marantz then. You want to tell the story about Solby
Sure.
Marantz in his basement?
Absolutely. I love this story. So in 1951, Saul, who was dissatisfied with the equipment that he could buy and was an engineer, and decided that he could probably make something that would make him happier. So he did. That is not the first piece. The first piece is actually a preamp, but that's how he started the company, and or I guess the germ of the company. And then as they move forward, it actually turned into a company. We obviously have had a lot of different models over the years. It's a long time that we've been making products, and we have tried to maintain that original identity, which I think kind of distills down to three things realistically: build better sounding, longer lasting, better looking products. And that is really what Marantz has done all over the world. And which, again, since 1953, which by the way was the incorporation of the company, 1951 was when Saul made the first preamp. And then his buddies got together with him and they made some for themselves. And then they took one to a dealer in New York. And the dealer said, "This is quite lovely. Could you make me like 8 of them?" And off we go. And there you go. That was the beginning of the company.
And I understand they also made some tuners, because that was pretty much
Oh,
the only
yes.
sources you had was vinyl players and tuners, right?
Correct. Yeah, they have made some fabulous tuners over the years. So there's the, I guess, the history. And there's that first preamp, which was called the Consulette, which that is the one. It is not what I would call an elegant piece of equipment, as you can see, but it was fabulous sounding. One of the early preamps that I had seen an image of actually had basically grease pencil markings to label what the different knobs and switches were for. And one of the cool things on that was on the input selector, there was a TV setting in 1951. I have no idea how he planned to get the sound out of the TV into that preamp, but how about that level of forethought? So really, since the very, very first thing Saul Marantz ever made, we were destined to be combining video and audio.
Right. So, and before 1980s, if we look at the timeline, the majority of these products were all analog, right? So it's only when we were acquired by Philips in 1980 that we started introducing the digital products, because Philips and Sony introduced the Redbook CD, and then the first CD player was born. So Philips kind of introduced digital audio into Marantz, and then from then on, everything started. That's the second part right here. In 1992, we had the first time that we started using HDAM, that's hyperdynamic amplifier modules. In 94 was actually the last tube amp that we introduced, the last tube amp. It was called Project T1. It was actually way too pricey to be popular. And then in 99, Marantz introduced the first SA-CD. So also Marantz had some history of firsts, right?
Yeah, and then the Slimline AVR. Look at that, way back in 2009, which is really a problem solver. Wouldn't you say? That's a really good thing for some customers.
Exactly. And then we had the reunification in 2001, where Marantz was back under Marantz Japan. Then in 2003, we had the 50th anniversary, and then we were acquired by Sound United in 2017. That pretty much sums a timeline in a few small lines. The difference, there is definitely, that's a question we get all the time. What's the difference between Denon and Marantz? Because not just AVRs, but also two-channel. So we're using different technologies to make them sound different, and different kind of components to do the sound tuning. For Denon, we use the ultra high current MOSFETs. They also have their own custom capacitors, and they use heavy duty EI frame transformers plus the sound tuning. So we have two sound masters here, and both of them, for Marantz and for Denon, have the responsibility for every single product that goes through their hands needs to match that generic Denon sound or that generic Marantz sound. So we have for Denon the sound manager called Shinichi Yamauchi, and for Marantz we have Yoshinara Ogata. So we call them Ogata-san and Yamauchi-san. So they, with their expertise, with their ears, together with the different audio circuitry, the different components that they use, can create that different sound. So for Marantz, They don't use high current MOSFETs, they use toroidal transformers. They use custom capacitors as well, but then they have the HDAM modules, and we'll explain a little bit later what that means, but that together with the sound tuning creates that typical warm musical sounding sound that you have with Marantz.
Hey, Frederic, do you mind if I ask you a question real quick before we jump into the difference between Marantz?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to see if the two people that you had pictures of there, I'm not going to try because I know I'm going to screw up the names. Do they work all by themselves in a little vacuum?
Well, they don't work by themselves. They have a whole team. So it's a whole team of people, but they oversee. So they are the benchmark, and then they have their juniors, which they guide through. So they have like an apprentice sound master, which they will coach to get the same sound, so that the identity for Marantz or the identity for the Denon sound is never lost.
Thank you.
There you
I
go.
thought that
So,
would be a good thing for everybody to hear.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Moving on to the Marantz difference. So they use the hyper dynamic amplifier modules. So normally this job is done by op-amp chip. The thing is, you cannot really do this with an op-amp properly. So Marantz created the HDAM. It's also used in a buffer amp. It's also used in the headphone amplifier and even in the filtering, in the Marantz musical mastering filtering as well.
Just one other thing about HDAMs, if you don't mind. What everybody else is using for their op amps, particularly in AVR land, is a Texas Instrument chip. It's very, very good, but by using the individual electronic components on HDAMs, resistors, capacitors, etc., you actually get to fine tune the sound by changing a value of just one of those pieces. And that is the big advantage of having HDAMs over the IC chip.
Another technology that they use to create that typical Marantz difference is the monitoring of the current feedback. So the current monitoring using current feedback gives you lower distortion. Voltage feedback can also be used, but in fact it's less expensive and less effective, because as the volume goes down, the distortion goes up. So unlike conventional voltage feedback amplification, the current feedback amplification makes the power amplifier insensitive to like difficult speaker loads.
Wait a second, did you just say that as the volume goes down, the distortion goes up?
That is the case if you're using voltage feedback. So we're not using voltage feedback, we're using current feedback. That's a big difference.
And wouldn't most customers listen at mid to low volumes most of the time as opposed to at reference level?
Well, not necessarily. The thing is, you want to have that very low distortion all the way at every speaker level, right? I mean, I sometimes have music on the background that's not loud, and I'm pretty picky about my sound quality. So I appreciate the fact that I will have very low distortion even at a low level.
I gotcha. That's what I was thinking.
Anyway, so that's the concept. We have these two types of technology, the HDAMs and the current feedback. There's another thing though, on the next slides. The way we do digital to analog conversion, that's different as well. If you look at a conventional DA converter, they've got three stages. Like you can see here, the first stage is a digital oversampling filter stage. The second part is oversampling with noise shaping. And the third part is the conversion from digital to analog. So if you're using PCM data, all three of these stages are needed. What we're doing different is we make our own DA converters. So for high end, there's only three manufacturers that make DA converters. You've got Siret Logic, you've got AKM, you've got ESS. I think ESS is very famous for the Sabre series. So the problem with that is they're relatively small chips. So the output power current is actually small, even though the resolution is very high. So the Marantz engineers, they think that the current makes the power of the music. So Marantz made these digital audio converters by themselves. And they also believe that DSD is the new analog because they use a different process. And that brings us to the next slide where we explain our way of converting, which is the MMM, stands for Marantz Musical Mastering. So they use their own unique patented way to upconvert everything to DSD. And it was actually Rainer Fink, who is an ex-Philips head engineer, who came up with this whole Marantz musical mastering concept. So we replaced the signal processing part with our Marantz musical mastering stream processing. We then applied proprietary filters and noise shapers, and then we replaced the D to A conversion by our MMM conversion technology. So PCM and DSD is upconverted to DSD-256 and then converted via the MMM conversion back to analog. The way they do that is using different clocks. Again, I'm not going to go too far into detail here, but it means every processor will have two crystals, two clocks, one dedicated for all the multiples of 44.1 and one dedicated for 48. So they will always use that specific clock that's a multiple to keep all the jitter down. So the main objective of doing this whole filtering and upconversion is to reduce the amount of jitter that you have, which results in quieter signals, less noise, and way more dynamic sound. This is a open top image of the SA-10 SA-CD player, by the way. So here you see the locations of the stream board, which is highlighted in red, and then the conversion in the lower PCB board, which is highlighted in yellow. And also you see here there's an oversized toroidal transformer. And this is an SA-CD player, by the way. So the oversized toroidal transformer is used because the whole DSP that's needed to do the upconversion is using a lot of power.
Hey, Frederic, let's talk about a few things. The first thing that we should talk about is, I know we're throwing out PCM and DSD and everything else, and some of these people may not really have a grasp of that, because we don't really talk about audio, that type of stuff, as much. So why don't we go through and why don't you give them a basic understanding of what PCM is and how does that take ones and zeros and make sound, and then what's the difference between the PCM and DSD, which is what you normally hear on like Super Audio CD or anything like that. Do you want to try to explain that?
For those who don't know, PCM stands for pulse code modulation. That's the digital data format that was used to bring PCM to the consumer market, as we all know, under the compact disc. So the compact disc, using 44.1 16-bit, basically called Red Book standard, can hold about 800 megabytes. DSD, on the other hand, which is direct stream digital, that's a format created by Philips and Sony, uses a different technology, different dense modulation, and a bit rate of 1 instead of 16. And the sample rate is way higher. It's 2.8 megahertz. That's 64 times the resolution of a CD. And a disc, SA-CD disc, can be up to 3.4 gigabytes of data. So you can store way more data. And if you want to know, the CD is called Red Book standard. The SA-CD is called Scarlet Book. That was introduced in 1999. So we're up-resing, up-sampling, up-converting everything to 256, DSD 256, before it's converted back to analog. I have something later on that I can explain also in the Denon slides, how we approach this differently with the alpha processing.
One of the ways we always try to explain it is, if you look at the way the CD was, it seemed like when they first heard CD, they were like digital, perfect sound, but there wasn't enough numbers that they could use to describe the sound to really recreate reality. So they tried to upsample it and do everything else to make it sound a little better. It's almost like trying to make exact change with 5-cent pieces, 25-cent pieces, and dollar pieces. You can get close, but you can't get all the way there. So there's ways to increase the amount of numbers you can describe, or you could do something like DSD, which is like a bag of what we call in the US pennies. So I can describe any number because it's one bit. Is it louder or is it quieter? So it kind of follows the analog waveform. The goal is just to make digital sound like analog, and all of these up conversion, upscaling, all of the processing we apply to our systems is to make it sound more smooth and natural and not digital, more like a real instrument, which I think you'll talk about more when you get to Alpha 24.
Exactly. That's for our output. Thank you for that. Another thing that we're using is different types of components to tune the sound. It's the type of components that dictate the characteristics of your sound. So in order to make that typical Marantz sound, we'll be using these high-grade components to match that typical warm emotional sound. So also for Marantz, you will see very often that they use copper-plated chassis that they will use a toroidal transformer, and that they also have their own custom-made capacitors. So all these are the main ingredient for the Marantz sound, which is a different approach that Denon uses, but we'll get to that later. Shall we move on to the products? The top of the line. So in 2016, we launched the PM-10 and the SA-10. This is what we call our new generation reference class series. So, and as you can see, we've already made quite a bit of awards. Jim, do you want to highlight some of these features for the PM-10 and the SA-10?
Absolutely. So there is the front and the back of the PM-10, which is our reference integrated amp. It is a fully balanced topology integrated amp, which means there, well, Frederic's going to explain the amplifier technology on that a little bit later. But basically, the signal is never just zero. It is always both sides of the equation. So you end up with the full sine wave throughout the circuitry of the device. So if you can feed it a balanced signal, which you can see the balanced input jacks up there, it will stay balanced all the way out, which is really remarkable. And it gives you some benefits, some of which are sonic and some of which are ability to place devices. It also has 3 power supplies, one for the preamp and then one each for each of the amplifier channels. And I believe we're going to show a picture with the top off after a while. It is unbelievable how well made this thing is. The phono preamp is both moving magnet and moving coil, and it is incredible high quality. We're actually using HDAMs in the phono EQ circuit. And then, as Frederic said, the separate headphone amplifier uses HDAMs, which is pretty darn cool. And then all of the things are upgraded, switches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it does have the power amp direct input, which we'll talk more about later. And then the last piece that's very premium is the remote control, which is aluminum and has really nice feel and heft. And frankly, looks pretty darn good too. And then we have the matching, I believe, SA-10.
Yeah, before we get to that, there's a couple of things we can probably add to everyone to understand that this is an integrated amp. So it's basically a preamp plus 2 mono BTL power amps, all built in one chassis. So also we're using the Class D HyPax amplification. So the switching power module here is considered to be completely analog amplification, even though everyone thinks Class D is digital, which is correct. The main aim was to get that analog type sound. And the way they got to do that is using the HDAM modules. So they managed to make that sound more analog. Moving on to the SA-10. This one has discrete DAC. We already talked about the Marantz musical mastering streaming and the musical Marantz mastering conversion. So it's a no chip solution. So we're using our next generation digital Marantz music mastering and the conversion of the BCM signal to DSD. They have selectable filters for CD and DAC mode, which we call filter 1 and filter 2. So basically gives you the option based on your own taste. You prefer filter 1 or filter 2 based on what you're playing, whether you play digital files or you're playing CDs. And then, of course, we're offering the optical coaxial digital inputs as well as a USB type asynchronous mode. So you can connect your laptop on the back using the USB-B and play any type of file that's supported up to DSD, which is 11.2, and PCM all the way up to 384 kilohertz, 32 bits.
I really like the fact that we have a USB-B
Thank
input.
you. I was going to ask about that. I was going to say, could you talk about what that is, please, and what's the advantage?
Which is
that's pretty much all the listening that I do in my case as well. So I have the laptop and I've got a Mac laptop. If you've seen Kenny Shiwata doing his demos, he's doing the same thing. He plays everything using Aurivana or JRiver.
What's the big benefit of sending the music over that way?
Because it's the shortest signal path, if you're telling me, you can send the actual file from the laptop without any networking directly using the USB to the source, to the converter. So first of all, you have your shortest signal path, but you're letting basically the SA-10 do all the processing and all the conversion to get the best possible sound quality that that file can offer to get to the original. You can put it that way. If an engineer is mastering all the music, the end result is the file, but the file playing back on different systems is going to sound different on every type of system based on what your capabilities are, what your connections, the speaker wires. So the ability to let the SA-10 do the conversion of let's basically the workhorse, do all the work for converting that file into what the engineer intended to convey with that music is, to my understanding, the best way. I tried different ways. I tried CD players, SA-CD players, but having a DAC that has that type of up conversion makes it, to me, sound the most analog-like.
The other thing that it allows, right, is it strips the clock off. So inside the SA-CD player are dedicated clocks for each of the different possible speeds, whether they be the 2.8 DSD megahertz, also the 48 kilohertz files, and then the 44.1 kilohertz, which means you're not up converting or you're not changing the clock speed via calculation, which also means you eliminate jitter, which is one of the other reasons that I think it sounds so good. By the way, Frederic, I'm with you. When I'm in my office, I'm using the asynchronous DAC always.
The internals of the SA-10 also have a lot of filtering to get rid of any outside interference that might get into the actual sound. So anyway, that was the SA-10. Are we ready to move to the little brother or the little sister? I'm not sure how we should be calling it.
The sibling. How about if we just go with the sibling? And
Yes.
I will let you take this piece if you want, because this is not something we have in the US currently, these two.
Exactly. So this was a product that was created for the EU market, which obviously we're able to bring to the APAC market, India, Middle East as well. So the PM-12SE and SA-12SE is the next generation. The SE stands for Special Edition, as you may have noticed. And if you're familiar with the KI Ruby, the inside parts and the circuitry are actually identical to the KI PM Ruby and the SA Ruby for that matter. So we have the same power, we have the same 2 times 100 watts with the Hypex NC500 switching power amplifier modules. So it's the same full discrete current feedback amplifier that you have with the HDAM SA3 for the preamplifier stage. What is different is we're using a steel chassis instead of a copper plated chassis, and the steel top panel instead of the thick aluminum top panel. So that's the difference. Similar for the SA-12SE, the inside parts again are identical to the KI SA Ruby. Also the same Marantz original DAC, the Marantz Musical Mastering Stream, and the MMM conversion. And we're using the same original, because that's something we made ourselves, the original SA-CD mechanism. So what we've removed is the copper-plated chassis again. It's steel and also a steel top panel instead of thick aluminum. So it's a little lower priced compared than the original KI as well. If you look at the feature comparisons, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the big difference between the PM10 and the PM12 is the amplifier topology. So the PM10, as we mentioned before, is fully balanced, whereas the PM12SE is single-ended, it's unbalanced. So it doesn't use the pre-bridge tied loads, which we'll explain later. And instead of 4 pieces, we're using 2 pieces of the Hypex modules and 1 switching power instead of 2.
Do you mind if I ask a question real quick?
Go ahead.
Well, first off, does the SA-12SE in fact have the asynchronous DAC where you feed it through a computer cable, a USB-B cable?
It's exact the same, yeah.
Awesome. And then the other thing is, I recall that there is actually a little bit of massaged phono input circuitry in the KI Ruby, the PMKI Ruby. that it was actually the most recently developed phono preamp circuit and that it was a little bit better sounding. Is that what
Yeah,
you've heard as well?
that is indeed, because everyone knows that Ken Ishiwata worked on the KI version and that he loves vinyl very much. So obviously he spent a lot of time trying to upgrade the phono stage. So there's a lot of work, a lot of research that went into that in order to get the best possible outcome. So the PM-12SE has exact the same as the KI phono stage. So I think
Awesome.
we can look at it on the next slide here. So you see the switching power supply in the left top. There's the power amp, which is directly connected on the binding posts, unlike the PM10. The PM10, you see they're also vertically placed, but they have a connection wire to the binding post. So for the PM12SE, they're actually directly connected. I can show that in the slide that goes after here as well. So, and the higher grade phono stage actually has different settings. So you have the moving magnets, and then you have the moving coil, a low and a high setting.
That PM10 is certainly fully packed. There's not
Yes.
much spare room in there.
Now, every little nook and cranny is used to put whatever technology in there to make it sound better. But less is more as well. I mean, it's not overly complicated. They simplified certain things to make it to get shorter signal pass, and the location of every part in every board and every component is also researched very well to make sure that it doesn't interfere with anything else. You see that the toroidal transformer is strategically located in the middle there as well. Now let's talk a little bit about BTL, a single-ended amplifier versus the BTL. So the PM10 being BTL amplifier, you can compare it with the analogy of the jump rope. The jump rope is done by two people versus the single-ended where it's done alone. So you see that amplifier is connected with the ground doing the jump load, and then the jump load is the speaker load. Does that make sense?
I like it a lot. It's
Awesome.
also easier to twist the rope with two people, right?
That's the whole point. So if you look at the metaphor, it's easier to explain why one type of amplifier topology would just do a better job. So want to do a bit of a summary. 4 things to remember about the PM12 is you've got connectivity for all sources, including very flexible phono stage. You can use it as a dedicated headphone amp. It's powerful enough to drive any type of speaker, and this is thanks to the Hypex modules. They're very powerful and very quick to get you those dynamics through. And it's a Marantz, it's made in Japan, and it's tuned by Soundmasters. The 4 things to remember about the SA-12SE is it plays audio discs and digital files. So you have your asynchronous input, you got your Toslink and your coaxial, so SPDIF inputs. Again, a dedicated headphone amp. You have 2 clocks, 44.1 and 48, that do all the work. So based on your sample rates of the original file that you're streaming or that you're playing back, you will choose either 44.1 clock or the 48 clock, which is the Marantz musical mastering conversion. Again, made in Japan and Soundmaster tuned. Which brings us to, and Jim, you can talk a bit more about that, the turntable from Marantz.
The top of the line turntable from Marantz. Thank you, Frederic. The TT-15. This is what I believe to be maybe the best turntable bargain out there. It does include a cartridge, and as you can see, the design is pretty spectacular. I will tell you that my cousin actually has a TT-15, and he put some LED lights on the back of his cabinet just behind where the TT-15 sits, and that translucent acrylic base really carries that light out. So if you're into those kinds of aesthetics, if that matters at all, that's a really nice little cool thing that is an addition to everything else. This is a silicone belt drive turntable, slightly different than the standard belt drive. But one of the things is the motor is independent of the chassis. So the motor sits all by itself. You can see it back there, almost see the switch. and it doesn't touch the chassis. So it will not induce any vibration whatsoever into the chassis. We have spent a ton of time designing, well, we haven't. Yeah, I probably shouldn't take credit for that. So this turntable, and I just want to mention this, is built by Clear Audio out of Germany. And the turntable comes with a Clear Audio cartridge, the Virtuoso Ebony, which most of the time, Frederic, right? It's about 800 euros.
I think it's an $800, so pretty much 800 euros value for the cartridge alone. Looking at the price that you buy it, it's quite a good deal.
Yes, it does take some effort to get it running. I will tell you that, but it's well worth it. The performance of this is just staggering. It's also, in my opinion, really cool looking. It's astonishing. And we even have a clamp that comes with it, which you can sort of see in that picture. I guess we need an LP with a dark center label. You can kind of see that, the little cup thing right there, which really helps to clamp that LP right to the turntable's platter and get rid of any possibility of not just slipping, but also keeping it as flat as possible, which is another benefit that this turntable has.
All right, let's move on to the 8000 series from Marantz. Do you want to have a go at this, Jim?
Absolutely. This is what I am currently listening to in my, well, not currently, but what I have in my office. It's the ND8006 and the PM-8006. And the ND8006 from Marantz is a really versatile, unique device. And then the PM-8006 is more of the same that Frederic talked about. It's us doing our really level best to make a dedicated integrated amp, which again is the preamp and power amplifier included in one thing. So you get your control and then the drive for the speakers in one chassis, and keeping the price down. So it's always a matter of money and performance, right? And Marantz does an incredibly good job of making sure that the performance level you get at the price point that it is delivered at is as good as it possibly can be. What don't you get? You don't get the really cool aluminum remotes, but you do get the shielded toroidal power transformer. You also get a little bit less power, right? You won't have as many watts. So if you have a big space with inefficient speakers, this may not be the model for you. We still have HDAMs in here. And in fact, these are the SA3 HDAMs, which you'll find in the PM10. And then it's got the premium phono EQ. Is it as good as the PM10 or the SA-12SE or the PM-12SE? No. Does it have as many inputs? No. Does it have balanced inputs? No. But it is quite a fine piece of machinery. And don't let that 70-watt tag fool you. This is a well-made, very substantial beast. It does not feel like 70 watts a channel when you pick it up. Wouldn't you say, Frederic? Isn't that true?
Absolutely, yes. Even the Marantz musical phono EQ stage is in there, so they didn't skimp on that. Even at a lower price, you still get all the bits and the main technologies that you find in the higher end models, but at a more affordable price. So
yeah, it's terrific.
Even the toroidal transformer is double shielded, so that goes to say they don't want to mess with the clean power, right?
That is very correct. Obviously, the benefit of the toroidals is you got a lot of shielding, which cuts down on the noise, particularly in the analog circuits, which is where noise can migrate into. And this is, again, not to the level of the PM-12SE, but if you took the top off and sat them next to each other and looked at them, you'd go, oh, I get it. Yeah, it's obviously it's kind of like that. It's just less so.
All right. Let's have a look at T-8006 and see what is also included in these.
So
So
this is that ND8006, which is just like in the SA-12SE and the SA-10, we do have the USB DAC, so the asynchronous DAC, but we've also added some other convenient features. Now, one thing about this, very important to note, is that the disc player is not SACD, it is compact disc only or Red Book only. So you really need to be aware of that. But we've added in our HEOS technology, which means we get wireless music streaming out of the ND8006 without having a separate box. We also added Bluetooth and AirPlay 2, and Bluetooth obviously lets you stream anything from your phone, maybe a podcast or something like that. So the versatility of this is remarkable when compared to the PM-12SE, or excuse me, the SA-12SE and the SA-10. This is one of my favorite pieces of gear, and partially that's because I use HEOS all over my house, and the HEOS Link, which is another way to get HEOS through uh, an amplifier that doesn't have it built in, is a small, compact little gadget that doesn't look as good, in my opinion, as having a full-size piece of equipment. I know that's stupid, but that's how I feel about it. Do you agree?
I totally agree with you. Yes. Like you said, the HDAMs also show up there. You've got, actually this one is also Roon tested, so you can use it with Roon 2 since it's got HEOS and AirPlay 2 in it. And yeah, there was a previous version called the NA8005 that was without the CD tray. And that actually wasn't selling well at all, or not as much as they wanted. So it goes to show that people still prefer a version with a CD player. So, you know, in case the internet collapses and everyone's freaking out, they still have the comforts knowing that they can get that silver disc out of the collection and then insert it in the device to play CDs.
So, Frederic, are you telling me that people still own CDs?
Oh, I certainly do.
Yeah, me too. I'm a bit old school. I don't stream everything. I own CDs as well as digital, completely digital, physical less media.
Yeah, I remember in my hallway when I moved in and I got blamed by the wife for storing so many CDs. You know, you got these little IKEA racks. I had like 12 or 14 of those small racks that goes from the top of the hallway all the way down to the floor, full of CDs. I actually gotten away with this for some while, but then when we moved in, what I did is I started ripping everything. So I still use the CDs, but in a different format. I ripped everything onto a NAS, and I kept the CDs for those who were the collection items, the limited edition versions. Just those are like accessible if I want to insert them and listen to it that way. So yes, I still use the CDs, but the majority of my listening now is using the asynchronous DAC. So I play from the NAS through my laptop. My laptop is connected with a high-grade USB cable, which I made myself, connected to the USB-B input on the back. And that's how I play most of it using the Roon software now. And then I have the remote, so I just have all the advantages that Roon gives you, but I have all the advantages that the Marantz sounds give you. So am I a Marantz fan? Well, up to you to judge.
I know the answer to that, actually, but I'm not going to blab. I'm going to let you take this one as well because you are well versed in this particular device.
Yes, so the PM-7000N is what we call our first connected integrated amplifier. So you see the N, just like you see with a lot of Denon devices with an H, we add the N at the end to identify that this product has HEOS on board. So again, you can see it's got a lot of awards already. This has been the first time that we introduced a integrated amplifier with built-in connectivity. So you're able to use it for different setups. You can use it as your digital hub in your living room, as we say here. It's very intelligent. If you have your TV connected for the optical and it's in standby mode, but you switch on your TV, the device, the PM-7000N, will actually recognize, hey, the TV is on, I'm getting a signal, I'm switching on, and I'm switching to TV. Of course, you have all the advantages that you have with HEOS built in. You can talk to it. You have your voice agents to Amazon Alexa, Apple Siri, Google Assistant to play your playlists from any type of music. There are certain limitations. Certain voice agents will only work with certain type of commands, so they're working to expand this. But you have your USB-A on the back, on the rear, to play directly from a USB memory or even a USB connected drive. This one does not have USB-B. What I would use it for, which is the majority of my music playing back, is streaming from a NAS. So I rip all my CDs and even my SA CDs onto a NAS, and I play all the files digitally. You're using basically your HEOS app to control the device. A couple more things here for the PM-7000N. You look at, there's a nice shielded toroidal transformer in there. It's a quite big heatsink. The digital circuit is completely shielded. It sits in its own container, so to speak, and that's to minimize any type of external interference you might get. We're also using the two types of technologies that are typical for the Marantz sound. So you got your full discrete current feedback, and you got HDAM SA3 in this case that does all the filtering and the Marantz musical mastering even in this particular product. Also new is because they're using new driver transistors, the power output compared with the previous PM-7005 is increased 45 times. So you got way more power, even in a smaller chassis. Another thing that's nifty is a subwoofer output. And on the previous session, we had the question, how does it work? How do you set it up? Well, you have various low pass frequencies that you can set, 40 all the way up to 120. Now, the way this works, it's slightly different from an AVR. Your left and right speaker will remain at full range, but you can set the crossover frequency for the sub in the filter settings and turn off the crossover frequency for the sub all the way up. So your subwoofer itself, you turn the crossover all the way to the top, all the way up, and let the PM-7000N do the sub management. And let's have a look. What else do we have? Oh yes, a very good phono stage, which is very important. So we wanted to have vinyl users also be able to enjoy this product. For a long time, Marantz integrated amplifiers have always featured these high quality phono stages. So for the PM-7000N, it also remains faithful to that legacy. So we also wanted to give them the best quality you can get for that price range when you want to play vinyl. And then last is a pure mode. Because it's got networking and digital circuitry inside, you can switch off in sort of an analog mode in 3 different ways. So you use your remote to either switch off the network or the USB function, or you can switch off the Wi-Fi so there's no internet streaming, or even the Bluetooth. So 3 different steps where you can go into your so-called pure analog mode to get the best musical experience. So for the PM-7000N, there's 3 things to remember. You got a fully discrete current feedback integrated hi-fi amplifier with HEOS built in. It's a Marantz, it's tuned by Soundmasters, so you got your most musical sound, and it has HEOS with streaming and supports the voice agents for seamless voice control. Which brings us to an overview of the Marantz integrated amplifiers, which is in this case for the European and the Asian region. There's of course the PM-KI Ruby for the Americas. And I believe, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, that you do not have the PM-7000N in your region, correct? And the PM-12 neither.
We have the, we don't have the PM-12, at least not that I've seen yet. We do have the PM-7000. Now I was thinking about, Phil, before you jump in, I just wanted to ask Frederic a question. Because while he was going through that PM-7000, I'm thinking, why do I have 2 pieces when I could only have 1 with the PM-7000 instead of the ND-8006 and the PM-8006? Is there anything that PM-7000 can't do that the combo of the PM-8006 and ND-8006 can do?
The 7000 doesn't have the USB, like a USB input, the asynchronous like you brought up. The next thing is the ability to expand and upgrade. Okay, so if you leave a PM-7000 and now you buy a PM-12, you got to buy another network player. Okay, so if you're planning on growing your system, separates are always better because you can just replace the amplifier section and then replace the network player and things like that. So there's more of a growth opportunity. There was a question about title and MQA and title, so we might as well address it now. So so they go, does any of the PM10s or any other model support MQA from title? And if not, let's talk about why.
I think the MQA unfolding is not done in the SACD part. So the thing is, MQA, in order to have the full results, you would have to unfold it twice. Once when you decode it in the software that you're using to play, it could be the title app, or it could be Audirvana, or it could be Rune for that matter. They will do the first unfold, and then the second unfold will be in the device that actually decodes and you sort of endpoint, you end DA converter.
But we don't support it right now. We don't do that secondary unfolding. Is there a reason why we don't? Is what I'm trying to get to. Or are we still looking into it? Is it because we're that's what we need that's what I want to get across, because someone's saying, why don't you guys support this? And
we're looking at it. Phil,
Okay.
the short answer is we are still looking at it.
Exactly. That's what we want to get apart.
And if enough people demand it, that are consumers particularly, and if that voice comes from our dealers saying we have to have this, who knows?
Yeah.
But I know we are looking at it.
Yeah, but a lot of the services are using large high-res FLAC files, which we definitely support. So like I said, FLAC is a more popular way of delivering on the streaming services right now, CD quality and above. So MQA.
Well, and one of the other interesting things is that we support DSD.
Exactly.
And depending on the model, we support it all the way up to 11.2 megahertz, which is ridiculous, the amount of data.
Exactly.
And there are not everybody supports that. So I guess we've made a slightly different decision currently, but we're studying it. Let's say that.
You think it's because we need to jump on the bandwagon and see whether we want to offer it or not? The main reason why MQA was introduced in the first place is because they want to stream high resolution files, but not using the full bandwidth. The thing is, while the internet is evolving so quickly, everyone is now able to get much higher bandwidth. And this is one of the reasons, for example, another competitor of Tidal called Cobus, who also started, is actually a European, it's a French streaming who also now launched in the US. They don't use that type. They actually stream in 192 kilohertz all the way up 24-bit, which is a different approach as what Tidal is doing. So Tidal was trying to sort of use a container that contains smaller information, but still has the same high res in there to be able to stream it. So it's give and take. People prefer uncompressed, some people prefer MQA because they think it sounds better, and you will have the other camp who will prefer the DSD streaming, so to speak.
Exactly. Okay. I just want to get it across because we dance around it. This is get to the explain what's going on and our thought and our philosophy. We haven't abandoned. We're not saying it's bad. We're looking into it, and if it becomes more and more popular, more and more services support it, it becomes something that we can do. But as you said, internet speeds are getting faster. People are starting to stream stuff like FLAC at CD quality or above. So the need to compress that is going away, so less services are adopting it. All right, so let's move on.
One of the conversations probably should be, would you like to be able to use your new system to listen to music in addition to watching TV and watching movies and playing video games and all of those things, right? And sometimes these days, we forget to ask customers if they like to listen to music. That's just the reality. And I think it's an important conversation to have because it will certainly impact what you're going to show them with regard to the gear and how they can get that in their home, right?
Mhm.
The second question, I think that's a really good question that a lot of people won't ask, but why not? What's the worst that could happen? Do you have the space, budget, and room in the house, and let's be honest, the permission of the decorating committee to have a home theater in one room and a 2-channel system in another room? What if the customer says, absolutely, that's good news, but maybe they don't, which would lead us to our third question, which would be, wouldn't it be great if we could design one system that would give you the best possible 2-channel performance and also be able to do movies, TV, and video games? That seems kind of like Nirvana, don't you think there, Frederic? It would be like the best of both worlds. Is that even possible?
Well, in fact, it is.
I believe
Let's
you
have,
are correct.
yes, let's have a look at how you are setting these things up.
This is how you would connect it. Your 2-channel sources, your SA-CD player, or your streamer, or your, for instance, just as a for instance, your asynchronous DAC and your turntable would connect directly to the AVR along with your video sources, and that would connect to all of your speakers. The next would be what a lot of people do is they add a power amp for the main speakers, right? So if you add a power amp for the main speakers, you take the pre-outs out of your AVR, feed it into a power amp, and connect your main speakers to that. And if you want to know how you wire it, we have a picture here, a lovely image of where you make those connections on the back. What do you get? You free up amplifier power inside the AVR to maybe do a second zone or additional surround speakers. You also obviously have a lot more power available on the main speakers. If you're going to go to the trouble of getting a 2-channel power amp, a separate amp, you're not going to go with a small, tiny, weeny one. You're going to go with a powerful one. So that will solve a little bit of your issues. But when you listen to video sources, you're feeding through the AVR out to the power amp, running all the speakers. And then when you're listening to 2-channel sources, you're listening to the AVR out to the power amp and just the main speakers. So what would be a way to improve that 2-channel listening experience? Well, we have Power Amp Direct built into 3 of our integrated amps, the PM-8006, the 12, and the 10. And I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit because I think it is a feature that is not well known nor well utilized, and I think it should be because it solves a lot of issues for customers. So what does it do? What it does is gives you...
Sorry, Jim,
Go
I
ahead.
was going to say there's one more model from Denon as well, which is the PMA-2500. That also has this Power Amp Direct, but because we're talking about Marantz, it's not on this slide. But we have been asked this question, what about Denon? So if you want to do the similar scenario, the PMA-2500 also does that.
Yeah, which I have an excuse because we don't have that in the US. The PM, we don't have that model. So what does it do? It allows you to get the best of both worlds, to have a high quality surround system based around an AVR and the flexibility that an AVR gives you. And at the same time, you also have the highest quality 2-channel listening you can have by using an integrated amp. So let's talk about how we're going to do this. How are we going to put this together? Well, it's a similar look to what we had before, right? Except that you'll notice the 2-channel audio sources are connected directly to the integrated amp. And then the pre-outs of the AVR are connected to the integrated amp, and the integrated amp is connected to the mains. So how do we wire that? This is going to look oddly familiar. And by the way, that's an SR6014 and a PM-8006. Take the front main pre-outs, RCA cables into the power amp direct input, not the CD input, not an AUX input, not the tuner input, the power amp direct input. That's very important, and it's a separate input. Okay, so let's show what happens when we're going to listen to surround sound. When we're listening to video sources, everything's connected to the AVR. The AVR feeds the preamp signal out to the integrated amp, and the integrated amp drives the mains. The AVR drives all the other speakers. Now, this is an illustration. It is not reality. The knobs don't disappear. All the buttons don't disappear. The VU meters don't magically appear. But what happens is when you select the power amp direct input, you actually not only bypass the preamp actually fully turns off, which means in this instance, the PM-8006 is now a 70-watt 2-channel power amp dedicated to the main speakers for listening to surround sound. Well, why would we want to do that? Because what happens when we go to listen to just music, 2-channel? You leave the AVR off, and now you have a dedicated, high-quality 2-channel listening experience. Today's AVRs are awesome machines. They really are. And we build them to perform to the best level we possibly can. But the needs of the consumer with an AVR require a lot of flexibility, and that flexibility builds in a lot of complexity and a lot of additional circuits that are not present in an integrated amp from Marantz. So the PM-10, the PM-12, and the PM-8006 all have this power amp direct signal or input. It's just like having a dedicated 2-channel system in the same room with the same pair of main speakers. Who doesn't want that? Frederic, do you want that?
I definitely am looking into it because I use a AVR, and in Hong Kong we don't have the space to put a separate listening for 2-channel and so we use everything in the living room. I've got my 7.1.2, no, actually 0.4 setup in my living room, but I actually listen more to 2-channel. So for me, it perfectly makes sense. I'm looking into either a PM-12SE or even a PM-10 as an integrated, just to do pure stereo listening. So for me, it definitely makes sense. Absolutely.